everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about part 2 of how the 12 apostles were martyred. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sicut in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. All right, so of course, I recommend you check out part 1 of this series where we talked about perhaps the most famous apostles, and we also include St. Paul in there because St. Paul was not one of the original 12 apostles. So let's get going. All right, so let's start with Matthew. Matthew, of course, wrote the first gospel, and we have a treatment here on that gospel of Matthew. He was a tax collector, as the book tells you that he was. His name was also Levi, as the gospel tells you that he was. And sacred tradition, and remember, all of this comes from sacred tradition. Really, only James, the son of Zebedee, John's brother, is actually mentioned in the scriptures as dying in the scriptures. He's mentioned in Acts 12, I believe, when Herod Agrippa kills him. But all these other ones come from sacred oral tradition, from which, of course, the Bible, some of it was written down, the Bible comes from sacred oral tradition. So with Matthew eventually preached around the known world, and he ended up being martyred in Ethiopia. He was killed while doing a mass. The king at the time was lusting after his niece, the king's niece, and of course Matthew was like, this is ungodly, you can't do that. And so as retaliation, the king had Matthew killed while he was doing a mass. My boy Caravaggio, go to the art history playlist we have, has a painting on him, which of course I'll show right here. Who else? Thomas, also known as Didymus, Doubting Thomas. I love Doubting Thomas because, you can relate to him. You can relate to him. And I think it's one of the greatest retorts that Jesus has for anyone who doesn't believe, right? I need to see. Why doesn't Jesus Christ show up in the sky and tell all the atheists that I exist? Da, 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 da. And Jesus just has the best retort. After he shows up, when Thomas is there, and this of course is after he's been resurrected, and he says, you want to put your hands in my wounds? It's kind of a little dig at Thomas. And he says, my Lord and my God. And then Jesus says, blessed are those who believe without saying an amen to that. Anyway, so Thomas, some of you guys know, preached around the Near East, and then he eventually was martyred in India. There's some belief that maybe he even went as far as China, but he was martyred over in India, and he was stabbed to death in 74 AD. I forgot to mention that Matthew was killed in 65 AD when he was killed at Mass in Ethiopia. Who else? We have Bartholomew, otherwise known as Nathaniel. John 1 has the kind of intro to there, and I just love it because Bartholomew's like, who's this Jesus guy? And then Jesus kind of knows him, right? Because Jesus is all-knowing. And then Nathaniel just like, I'm sorry, I'll serve you. By the way, so he is skinned alive in Armenia in 72 AD. You got to think of all these different martyrs, like which is the worst? Getting deflailed, skinned alive? All right, and then we got St. Simon, St. Jude, and St. James. Now these are all, sacred tradition will tell you, are all related. They're all brethren of Christ. Now we've talked about this on the episode of the Perpetual Virginity of Mary. And we talked about this on the treatment we did on the Gospel of James as well. So let's start with James. James the Just, or James the Less, he wrote the Epistle of James, one of my favorite, top 5 favorite. And we know through sacred oral tradition, and one of probably the best books I recommend if you want to know about the early church is Eusebius of Caesarea's ecclesial history. It's kind of a dry read, and I always kind of dig it, but he borrows from a lot of primary sources like Josephus, for example. But he mentions there how James the Just died. The Jews were angry at him because, of course, he was being effective as a missionary to bring Jews into the way, so to speak. And so eventually they told him to recant. He didn't want to recant, so they threw him off a pinnacle, and he fell, and then that didn't kill him, and so they came up to him. And Eusebius always mentions the name of the guy who came and just smashed his brains out until he died. So that's how he died. And even Josephus says that the big destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD wasn't necessarily because of killing Christ, but it was because killing James the Just. Now, Josephus is, we don't have to listen to Josephus, but either way. Then we have the 2 brothers. So we have Simon the Zealot. He went and preached to Persia, and he was crucified in 67 AD. And then you got Jude, also known as Thaddeus, his brother, and he was also in that kind of Near East area, and eventually he was stabbed to death in Persia. And so those are our 12 apostles. All of them, aside from John, was martyred. The emperor tried to kill John, but he couldn't be killed. And I guess they're just a great witness. Martyr means witness. It's just a great witness to how the truth, right? You hear the atheists will always say, well, how Jesus wasn't resurrected. They just all drank the Kool-Aid and da-da-da. You got to remember, like, one of the proofs, and it's not by no means a definitive proof, but one of the proofs of that Jesus was resurrected is like all these men, all these people died because they truly believed it. Nobody came back and said, oh, we made this up. There's always going to be a snitch. Oh, we made this up. No, they all went to their graves happily, I should add. Happily. Go to the episodes we did on the 3 apostolic fathers. Polycarp, Clement, Ignatius. Read there. They were all happy. They're all happy to be martyred. So if the time calls where you have to either choose between Christ or dying, remember what Christ says, don't worry about those who can kill the body, worry about those who can kill the soul. And one of the ways in theory you could kill the soul, aside from doing bad things, bad works and fornication and drunkenness and all these things, is to turn your back on him. And we have that episode. What does Christ say about those who turn their back on him? Either way, guys, please hit the notification, like, and subscribe button. Post in the comments. Let me know what you think about the 12 apostles and how they died. Anything that I got wrong, please hit the notification. And take care. God bless and pray.